Studio, and I thought I'd link that. One of the things you can do once Visual Studio is down in the tray, if you want, you can pin it to the tray. Keeps you from having to look for it later. Come on in.
Thanks.
So I'll wait a moment for you to get logged in. So I'll give you a minute to log in, then I'll start. You won't have the first part of this, but you will. I was talking to those two. So I'm going to pin this so I don't have to forget to do that. I'm going to zoom to look at a couple of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the website that we had. Rather than open project, it's usually better to do file, come on over, open, website. Projects are treated a little differently than websites. Not sure why. Now normally this would go to where it's supposed to. It's in documents and Visual Studio 2015 websites.
And that's from last week, right?
Yeah, this is the one, actually not last week, this is last class.
Oh my God.
So I call this Classic ADO. And if you're doing this at home or something too, it's best just to navigate to the folder. Don't go inside the folder. So you probably won't have these files, as I said. Those of you that did it will have the files. Unless you moved them and are on a different machine or something, which could be a problem. If you have the folder, you can just put the folder on your desktop and navigate to the folder, right? Or wherever you want to put it. So I want to talk a little bit about what we did last time. You guys, so no questions coming to you? I know 2 days is a long time. We made a connection over here to the Community Assist database. And this, one of the things I want to say, this is the Server Explorer, and this has nothing to do with your project. It's just that Visual Studio is linked to the database. It doesn't link your assignment to the database. All it does is it puts access for you to look at the tables, and if you want to know what columns are in something, you can look, inside and see the columns and what the keys are. That's really useful when you're working with a database. But this has no connection to your assignment itself. If you guys want to connect, what you want to do is right-click, add connection. And for us, we're all using Server 38 right now, rather than the local one. And when you do that, you can see all the databases that are on there. The ones for this class will be actually the book review, show tracker, and this one time I'm using Community Assist as an example. Just this one time. And then actually for only the first assignment that we do with the databases, you guys will use book review. Everything else will use show tracker. So if I were to do, I don't have a link to book review, so I'll just do that and do OK. And I'm pretty sure I added you both. So in the Server Explorer, SRV, Oh, we started so you're logged in here on the server. So you can go into Visual Studio. You don't have to log into Visual Studio. I'm going to do one thing real quick.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
I was here last week. I see a connection with.
Yeah, and these connections really don't. They're not doing anything. So this is going to be on the video, which is totally irrelevant.
I don't know. What's over here? Oh, it's you're here,
I'm having trouble typing. Okay. This is an aside. I just want to make sure you guys are in there, but I know that I did for you.
Okay. You're our guys. What's your name? I'm Madonna.
You're a member of SQL Users. You should be able to get in there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try again.
I will. If it doesn't work, we'll fix it before the day is done. That's the wrong. There we go. Being in Zoom is weird. All right, so I'm going to go back. So what I wanted to do, I mean, as I said, this isn't super relevant to the assignment. It's really useful when looking at these databases to be able to see them. Did it allow you to log in? I'll look at it.
Does the data provider matter?
Yes, it needs to be SQL Server.
Okay, and then data provider, .NET Framework, data provider for
SQL Server.
SQL Server.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me. When I take the open tables, it can get to me and now, so I probably have to do another connection.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't matter for right now. So what are you under? That's book review, DB. We'll worry about those later. Again, as I said, this isn't that relevant to the assignment. So part of what we did with the assignment, we talked through a lot of the different aspects of what we were doing. So let's go to the data class, because what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit to this. Okay. And again, if you go on to, I'll show that just real quickly, and then we'll work through this. So I'm going to go into GitHub, and mine is github.com/spconger.
Yes, wait up.
Oh, a GitHub. And then if you go there, if you go to repositories, you'll see one down here, ways. It's called a classic ADO example. And if you go into the app code, okay, there it is, grants and services, you'll see a class kind of like what we're making, but fully commented, right? And any of these, you could actually, if you want to run this program, so let's go back to the whole classic ADO example. You can actually just download it as a zip file, extract it, and then navigate to it to open it. You might have to change a couple of things. I think my connection string is localhost in this, and you'd have to change it to server 38. If you take it home or do it on your own machine, you also might have to change the server name, and I'll show you where to do that. Let's go back to Visual Studio. So I'm trying to do a quick, so I'm going to go back to the Solution Explorer, which has the files. Remember when we added the class, it added it to the app code. We also changed the web config. And for this example, this is where you would change the source. Notice how we added this manually. Connection strings, add name, community assist connection string equals data source equals server 38. So on the GitHub, it says localhost because that's the name of the default instance on my machine at home. So this would have to be changed to server 38 if you're going to do it here, the example from GitHub. Or if you're on your own machine, you can change it to ./SQL Express or localhost, depending on what you're running. So this is crucial if it won't connect if this is the wrong server. The initial catalog is community assist. Again, that's the name of the database. Integrated security equals true means we're using Windows authentication. So what that means is that your login in your Windows machine will pass you through to the SQL Server, and it is mapped to a user in SQL Server. In Server 38, it's mapped to SQL users, which is a group that David made on the thing for us. On your own machine, it's probably you, right? If you installed it, one of the options when you're installing is to make the current user the admin. Do that, because if you don't do that, you're going to have an instance of SQL Server that you can't access. You know, either that or you have to go in and make a special account in Windows, give it the permissions that you need, and then use it, which is actually the better strategy, but it's a lot more work, and it's a pain to have to log out and then log in into a different account to use SQL. So I would just make the current user the admin. All right, does that make sense? What we did. So this is the string that connects it to the database. We need to say what the server is, what the database is, and how we're authenticating. If you don't use Windows authentication, if you don't use integrated security, then instead of saying integrated security here, what you do is you give it a username and a password, right? And we put it in this web config because it's more secure than in the code itself. It is possible that they could get into a debug mode where they could read from a remote site where they could read the code. But they usually can't. It's usually impossible to get access to the web config on the server. I'm sure there's a way, but generally. So it's supposed to be more secure there. So we did this class, and we used the ADO. This is the classic method. This is doing it by hand. It's actually a little harder than the ways I'm going to show you in the future. So ADO, and those libraries are up at the top, so let's start with that. We had to add system data SQL client, and then configuration is a set of tools for accessing the config file, the web config file. Data and Data SQL Client are two of the libraries in ADO. And ADO is just a set of data libraries. It's a set of tools for managing databases. Okay, SQL Client is a specific, these are specific tools for SQL Server. There's Oracle Client, which you can have, which is a specific set of tools for Oracle. And there's also MySQL. They're not included in this one by default, but you can go get them for free, you know, if you want to do other databases. What else do I want to say about that? There's other kinds of libraries. I mean, if you think about, as I said, what a programming language is essentially a set of libraries of pre-made objects for you to use. You could do like system dot encryption if you wanted. There's an encryption set of libraries for encrypting and decrypting things. There are lots. There are actually hundreds of libraries, each with dozens of objects. You know, so there is a fairly big class. Same is true of Java. Same is true of Python, etc. The ones that are gray here are gray because they're not actually in use. In this version of Visual Studio, it bolds the ones you're actually using and leaves the others out. It gives you these in the template, and as I said, you can probably get rid of those. The reason that they're there is that they're just sort of advertising like generic collections and things. If I were to make a list object, then generics would be in action and such. We will do that later, actually. We will make some list objects. All right, so part of the objects that we're using, and I mentioned these before, there's a SQL connection. The connection object does what it says, right? It's there to do the connection, to make the connection to the database. We are using the configuration manager so that we can talk to the config file. This is the name we gave the connection string. Right, so that what it's doing is it's referring to the config file, looking for the section that says connection strings, and it's picking the one out that has this name. If you want it to go easier, you can just put 0 here, because it's a collection of connection strings, and they're like any collection or array. They're enumerated starting with 0. But I usually find it safer to name them, to use the name. And it's weird that we have to turn it to string, but it does. I think it's stored as an object. Everything in the XML file is stored as an object. So it has to be converted to string. All right, so when we come down here, this is what we did where we got our data table. That's another pre-built object, and it is just like a table in a database. So it is an object that contains rows, and each row contains columns. Okay, and you can program each element of that separately, though we're not going to. It's neat. I mean, because in most languages, what you'd have to do is write this into some kind of object and then put it in an array, which you can do here too. But so then we have our SQL string, and one of the things that I'm going to show you when we go into the ADO entities is that it will write all your SQL for you, which is good and bad. But most programmers hate SQL strings because they are just strings. They're not debuggable in the environment. The only way you can debug them is to run them and have the errors come back from the database. Or run them in the database first, which is not good either. So we're just getting the grant type key and the grant type name from grant type. And this is a table in Community Assist. These are 2 columns in Community Assist. The command object, as I said, remember what the command object does? So this is just a review. It passes the SQL through the connection to the database. Right, so the command it can do other things too. It can call a store procedure, things like that. But generally, what it does is it's passing an SQL command through the connection to the database. The data reader is an object that was designed to read the data. And as I said, they call it a fire hose cursor because the data just pours through it. You can't move forward or backwards. There are other objects that will give you a lot more control, but we don't really need them. what we're going to do is we're going to read it through the reader into the data table. Okay, so then we open the connection, and then the reader is executed by the command object. So it's put in it's flowing the data through. The table has a neat load method that will just read everything that's coming through the reader. And then we can close the reader, close the connection, and we can return the table, which now has all the data in it.
If you don't close anything, do they close automatically?
So the reader will eventually close. It'll eventually go out of scope. The connection will not close automatically until you are gone from the project, basically. They leave the connection open in case you want to use it again, right? So it doesn't close automatically, but it's better practice to always close it immediately after you're done with that. So one of the things, if you're doing a whole lot of data calls, is to decide whether it's more efficient to constantly be opening and closing the connection, or whether it's better to use a single connection. But the longer the connection is open, the more traffic there is between the server. That you have a connection open on the server, so you're not independent of the server. So bandwidth and traffic become issues. We're not going to do anything where those kinds of scopes, but think about it if you're Amazon or something and you have hundreds of thousands of people hitting the same data tables at the same time. Is it better to open hundreds of thousands of connections, or is it better to although I think connections are session specific, so you might have to open thousands of connections anyway. But does that make sense as logic? And again, I don't expect you, how would you know these objects exist? You either have to be told or you have to read it. There's no way to get this off just by intuition, right? Our languages are very artificial things. So the other part that we did, and we're almost done with the review, is we built, why do I have two web pages up? I think that's just a second copy of the first. I'm going to go to the source. Now, and for you guys, the way you get a web page when you do an empty one is you just add. And you add a web form. So in our web form, which I left as default, I want to go to the ASPX part. Oh, come on, show me. Why am I not seeing the ASPX part?
Having a similar issue earlier. I just closed it and then reopened it.
Just closed it and then reopened?
Yeah, I don't know why it was like that.
Ah, weird. One of the things, this is totally off topic, Microsoft's, particularly Visual Studio, used to be this flawless, beautiful software. It's still pretty neat. I mean, it's incredibly complicated. It's my favorite development environment. And I like Eclipse, and I like some of the others. I like the Android Studio, but this is really a masterpiece. But there used to never be an error in it, and these days there's all sorts of bugs in it. And the reason why there are bugs in it is that Microsoft is releasing new versions like annually. They used to be like 5 or 6 years apart. This is 2015. I think there's 2016 beta, or it may even be out yet already. And it's partially because they're moving so fast. One of the things that this has, and again, this isn't really relevant, but this version it has Android API in it. It has iOS API. You can work in a lot of languages other than the Microsoft languages. They're trying to catch up in some way with the rest of the world.
It's like they're not developing in the test-driven development environment.
Well, yeah, I think they are, but they shortcut the tests. And we're going to talk about tests when we get in the next assignments. I'm going to talk about how you test your stuff. I think they're letting the the developers and users do most of the testing. Windows 10 too was buggier than their usual. The Windows has always had a tendency to be buggy, but all right. So this is what you get to get a web page. You know, as I said, we did this before. The basic HTML. It gives you both the HTML5 heading and the XHTML heading. I leave it in there because I actually prefer XHTML, but you don't have to have both. One or the other would work. The XHTML forces you to be strict, which the HTML5 does not. Okay, so we have our form, and we did, from our toolbox, populate the toolbox. There it goes. We chose the drop-down list, and that's all, actually, at this point. We're going to add something to it in a minute. I didn't even rename it. No, again, the tools come in as XML. And they always have a run-out server because the browser isn't going to understand them. Right, so it has to take the .NET compiler to understand them. So one of the things that they always do, again, and you don't have to do this, but I think it's a nice practice, is they separate the code page from the HTML page. So we have a code behind. If you don't like doing that, you can put your code in a script tag in the head. All right. But I think it makes it nice and clean to have it over here. So what we have is this other class. I added, this one wasn't there. I added for data table because we need the data table. Okay. Oh, notice it's a partial class. Didn't somebody ask about that last time? Anybody have an idea what a partial class is? It's only Microsoft. There's nothing like it that I know of in Java or anywhere else. Well, it's sort of what it says. It's half of a class. What do you think is the other half of the class? Yeah, well, it could be, but it's a web page.
Oh.
So anything on the default ASPX page, like that says run at server and all those ASP controls, they actually get rendered into, I would say C#, but they actually render directly into bytecode. So they actually are they're the other part of the class. So if we go up to the head, notice the code file, default ASPX, they both inherit from default. And when I go to here, you know, it's the partial class is default, right? So it's the other half of that page. Both parts get compiled together on the server. It's not important to know that, except that these things have to match. When you name a web page, when you create a web page and match it, the name of the partial class has to be exactly the same as the name of the web page. When you change the name of the web page on the web page, it may not update this. So you'll suddenly find that you're not talking to your code page. Usually naming is not an issue if you name it when you create it, but renaming can be a bit of an issue. And also, if you rename something over here, it has no effect on the code. It changes the file name, but it doesn't change the internal names. Which is different than, say, Java. I don't know how many of you are doing Java, so Java examples may or may not be relevant. In Java, the file name and the class name have to match, but they don't in C#. How many are doing Java? Yeah.
I know the underscore.
Right, and that's the only time they do that is with default. I'm not sure why that naming convention for default. It doesn't have to be there for others. The template that they have on the in their .NET for this particular, for the default web page has an underscore. There is I'm trying to remember in C++, underscores have a particular meaning when you're doing class designations. And it probably has that meaning here, but I don't remember what that is. No, I think it has to do for like abstract or you know, I'm not entirely sure what it. I remember it has a specific. it's a naming convention for a specific kind of function, a class function. And I don't remember. Maybe I'll look it up. I have some C++ books in my office. But normally, that's not the normal naming convention in Microsoft. Usually, the only place I know of it is the default. And you two didn't hear, but most default is for the Microsoft or Internet Information Server. Default is the same as index, right? And if you want, you can configure IIS to make that index, but default is its default. All right, so what we wanted to do was to load the drop-down list, and then we'll finish this in a minute. The data class is the class we made, right? And I just named it DC because I'm lazy, but it's DC data class. You should have some name that means something to you, and we made that class new, which means we initialized it. And I did it at class level so that I could access it in all my methods. You could do it in each method if you want, and there are arguments that would be the better route, or you can see debate either way. All right, so then I did a separate method down here, and we have our data table, and we call our method from our data class getServices, which is what populates the data table in this method on the class, and it returns a data table. So it's being assigned to our local data table. Now, one of the neat thing about a lot of Microsoft controls is that you can just bind these things to them. You don't have to loop through them and assign the data like you usually do in a regular table. So I can just assign tables as a data source to the drop-down list. I can say what I want to display and what I want to reserve in the background as a value. So you can have two. It can basically have a key value pair in Brainlist. So this is the name. This is the key. I'm putting the key here because it'll make our next query. We need it for the next query, right? Because we're going to query all the services. So this is just a list of services. We're going to query all of the grants based on those services. Okay. And then, just to run it once so you see it, there are a couple other things we have to do. So there it is. These are all of our services. I should have alphabetized them, which we could do. I could have put an order by in the query. So that's as far as we got. There's questions about that. I don't expect this necessarily to make perfect sense after even going over it twice.
I've got a couple errors in mine. I figured out why the drop-down list references.
So did you name it drop-down list? Go to your page? No, on this page. So let's go to the drop-down list one, but it doesn't have a name. So actually, this should be.
Yeah, I didn't know why I don't recognize that. But then
So this should be like
the thing that was highlighted was
and then go back to those come from the database. No problem. They come from the database and the query, because what we're getting those from, right? The data table that we're getting. Let's kill this web page. So the data, when these two fields come from here, the query from the database, and they have to match, right? Nothing is just magically there. They're there because they're in the results set. Okay.
Money on the things that's like down.
what? Yeah, it will say if I'm done until you're done.
Could you go to line 20 real quick? Just
Sure.
please. Connect new to
Right, so you need to make the connection new. Objects always have to be made new. Again, if you in Python, you guys did you have to ever make anything new? I think you have to make an object new in Python, I'm not sure. What new does is it copies the object into RAM, into memory, so it's available to be used. It also initializes the object according to the constructor. So until you say new, this connection object is just words. It's just a class that exists somewhere else.
Could you explain like the 4 tabs, the data class, CS, web, that thing?
Sure.
In context to each other.
Right, so the default ASPX is the web page that has the HTML and any of the controls that you want, right? So this is HTML. I didn't put a title. I've been real loose on this. This is the HTML. So this is the basic, web code. This code, this ASPX CS, notice it has default. These 2 pages are twinned. So when I say drop-down list one here, it has to exist on here. The 2 are related. They're both parts of that partial class. They're the twin parts. So you can't have any objects here that don't exist on that page. Does that make sense?
one more time, you said one more.
All right, so drop down list one here exists here, right? On the web page. Those 2, this refers to objects that are on the web page. If that object isn't on the web page, you'll get a red squiggly line.
Okay.
And it'll tell you that it doesn't exist.
I do have that squiggly line.
So if you named it something else,
Or scroll to the default CS code.
so this is what ties us to that other class, right? So the data class, this is the local instance of it. When make it new, we initialize it. We make it available to be used. But it's available to be used under this name. Right, and this name is arbitrary. You can name it whatever you want. You can name it Ralph if you want. Whatever makes sense to you. Again, these things refer to the other page. Now the class, unless you call that class, it does nothing, right? So unless you actually explicitly call it and give it a local name, it does nothing. Down here, this DC relates to this DC. So this DC is our instance of the data class. Inside that data class, we had a method called get services, right? And that get services, so we go to the data class, that we have get services. It returns a data table, right? So down here it says return table. So it returns a data table that's been populated from the database with these commands.
Oh, nice.
So when we go back to our thing here, I have a data table, which I give a name. It doesn't have to have the same name. The table here can be named whatever you want. But this returns a table. This is a table to receive that. I don't have to make it new because it's not a new table. It's the table that's coming over from the other class. Does that make sense?
Do they have to be the same name?
They do not. And maybe they shouldn't be so that you don't get confused. Does that show how, I mean, we could draw some pictures too. That's a perfectly good question. I mean, anytime you're having trouble figuring out what's going on, that's more important to me than that you get the stuff to work right away, is that you have some idea of what's going on.
So like the default page, or the pages that were twin.
Right.
So the first one was the web page, and then the
Right, and this is code that basically animates that web page.
okay.
Right, so this is code that puts the data in the drop-down list.
And then what are the other two?
Yeah, AT meeting.
Which tab?
No, this is what it-
Okay, I can look in a while.
Kids,
The web.
The web config is a configuration for the web page. Right now, it's pretty minimal, but we do have our connection string in there, right? This is what tells the data class how to connect to the
Oh, okay.
to the database. The web config can have other things in there, like it has debug equals true. When you ship a web page, when you make it active for other people, you should always turn this to false. You don't want other people debugging your code. The target framework tells what .NET frame it is. Later, although we won't write it, this file will be full of stuff that Microsoft puts in there to just configure its tools.
Mine looks like this.
This is actually, so this tells the server what the basic configuration of your website is, right? And it can do things like hold connection strings. It can do other things too. Does that make sense? So we have those 4 tabs. And those 4 tabs correspond to, and still running, aren't they? Those 4 tabs correspond to the files over here. So we have a folder called app code where we have our data class. And then we have the default ASPX and the default ASPX CS. Notice how they're always, this is that, and then this kind of belongs to it. And then there's the web config file. Does that make sense? Web, yeah.
How would this file, the directory structure exist on like a web server?
Exactly like that.
Just like that?
Yeah.
So that's the root, is the classic.
Yeah, this would be the root.
Okay.
And I'm supposed to be a delegate on Saturday, and you keep calling to remind me. Or Sunday, I think it is. Anyway, yeah, the structure would be the same, and you can add files, or you can add things too. Eventually, our structure over here is going to get really complicated because one of the things we'll have to do for certain things is to have Java jQuery. We don't have to do anything with the jQuery, but the tools that Microsoft developed use jQuery. Anyway, the other thing with this, and as I said, we're kind of just repeating, just going over the basics, and I want to finish this for you. But in the web page, if you know what you're doing, again, you can do any HTML command you want. There's nothing forbidden. You can do all the JavaScript and jQuery you want, right? And in fact, if you want to do anything other than a simple flow layout, you have to use some CSS, right, to lay it out. And as I've said before, my pages are going to be really ugly. They'll function, but in real life, you would want to make them pretty.
What is that run at?
Oh, run at server? That means, all right, so this is XML, right? ASP drop-down list. It's the name of a control. Browsers don't understand, no browser understands what any of these are. I mean, there are HTML equivalents, but the ASP equivalent, it doesn't. So it has to be run at the server, which means that the server has to analyze this, compile it. When it returns it as a web page, this will actually just be a, do they call them lists? I forget. It's just a normal drop-down list structure that it'll be HTML when it returns. Does that make sense? And then the form, you guys didn't hear this, but all of your ASP controls have to be in the form, right? The head has run at equals server because if you put your scripts in there, it needs to be able to process them. And again, the browser will process JavaScript just fine. All browsers understand JavaScript. All browsers understand HTML. But they do not understand C# and they do not understand the ASP stuff. Did you, okay, so I will do some error shooting in a bit, but I also want to show you a little bit about error trapping and troubleshooting here in a minute. All right, so I am going to do one other thing while I'm here. I'm going to go down in my list. I am going to the data. Notice there's a little arrow there. Can you guys see? Under data. And I'm just going to get the grid view. And I'm going to put it like right under that. I'm going to leave it as grid view 1. If you have more than one grid view or more than one drop down box, you should name them, right? And you name them by changing the ID. So this is a grid view. So it's down under data, which by default is closed. And I'm doing a grid view. Now what a grid view is it's a simple table. It has a little bit more functionality than a table, but that's how it renders, is as a table. What we're going to do is we are going to pick a value from the drop-down list, and it will show all the related values from the grants, right? So it's a list of what kinds of grants I give out. This will be a list of the actual requests for those grants. Having put it here, though, we need to go away and fix that in the data class. Add that element.
So if we need just the name of grants, we don't need the grid view.
If you just needed the names, you don't need the grid view. This is going to actually, as I said, it's going to be a table. And you can make it a pretty table, but it'll be fairly ugly here. All right. So I just want another aside. All of these controls have an enormous number of properties and things that you can work with, and I'm not going to. But I just wanted you to know that you can customize every one of them in a lot of different ways. All right, so I'm going to go back to the data class, because what we want to do is put a method here that gets the values from the drop-down list and pulls up, you know, the related grants from the grant request table. So I am going to do a public so we can access it from the web page. I'm going to let it return a data table also. It's just an easy way to do this. Later we'll be using lists with objects in them, but right now we'll just do a data table. I'm going to say get grants, and we're going to pass I guess I can call it service key. It's actually called grant type key. You want me to name it what it's called?
Yeah.
It does, yeah. This is a variable, so it doesn't matter. There's a little bit of danger in doing this, in that it is an object that exists. But it should only exist in other contexts, so it should be okay. One of the things, and I've said this before, and I will say it again, never name two things the same if you can avoid it in any way possible, because it will confuse things. And a lot of times I've gone and the code all looks good, but what's wrong is that you've named something locally the same as something remote, and the local takes over, and so it's not working. All right. So naming things, and I'm not good at it, but at naming things is a really important. Don't ever name two things the same if you can avoid it. So I am going to, so the reason it's red underlined, anybody remember? Return. So I'm going to do data table. I'm going to call it table again equals null. And then I'm going to return table. You don't have to do this now. It's just if you're annoyed by red underlines. All right, so we're going to do something really close to what's up here. We're going to have a SQL string. So I'm just going to do string, and I use the same names. I say don't name things the same, but these are in different contexts, different scopes. Remember, scope is whatever, when you declare something, it only exists in the block in which you declare it. So if you declare it inside of a method, this SQL can only be seen inside of these. The other one can only be seen inside. So they actually don't conflict with each other, but it's perfectly all right to name them differently as well. So I'm going to do an SQL string, and so it's just going to be select. And I'm going to do a star, which is actually not a great idea in a development environment, because you don't always know what you're going to get back. But I'm going to do it anyway. From grant request. Do I want everything in grant request? That is a question. I'm just doing a quick look at grant request. So we get the date, the person key. Actually, let's do name them. So I'm going to return the grant request date. Grant request explanation. Did I spell that right? I spelled it the same, whether it's right or not. And then grant request amount from grant request. And then there's one other part here. You do not have to do this. I'm going to break this. And the reason I'm going to break this is just to put it all on screen. I'm going to say where grant type key equals, and I'm going to do a parameter there. And we'll explain that in a moment. Couple of things if you do break this. It's really crucial that you leave a space at the end of the quote. And at the end of this quote, if you don't, it'll ram it all together and it won't understand the sentence.
So you have an end quote on the first string, and then the from grant request is in new quotes, and then where?
Right, I broke it up so it would all be on the page.
So if mine's not broken, I don't need the additional.
You don't need those pluses if you don't break it.
I'm not talking about the pluses, I'm talking about the parentheses. So you have from grant request in its own set of parentheses there? Should that be in its own set of?
What do you mean parentheses?
Quote
Quote marks.
Quotations.
This is concatenating it, right? So each one of these is a fragment of the string.
Oh, got it. You concatenated because you broke your line.
Yeah, just because it wasn't going to fit on the screen in this zone.
Okay.
The thing is, you cannot break a literal quote unless you break it up to concatenate it. You can't just break the line. There are rules like I could break the line right here, but I can't break it in the middle of the quote unless I do this.
So since I'm not breaking mine, should I be putting?
You don't need the pluses.
What
And you
about
don't.
commas? Do I need a comma in the string where I'm not?
You need comma here, and you need a comma here. You
Okay.
do not need a comma after that.
Okay.
Word wrap doesn't work on it.
It does, but I turned word wrap off. I don't like word wrap on the front screen because it'll wrap in places that are illegal for you to make a change. And people copy me so slavishly sometimes that they break where I break, even if it's word wrap doing the breaking. So I don't word wrap up there.
Could we also end the string at the last equal sign and then concatenate our?
Yeah, it's a bad idea though.
Oh,
One of the things that you should never ever do in a web page is concatenate in the value. And I know that it's a real common practice. The reason is that opens you up to a SQL injection attack.
oh, right. That's the website.
It would work, except if somebody types in, because you can do something like, you can say equals, and then you'd have a concatenate in a text box, and it would say equals 1, or equals, I mean, they would just put in a value, like 1 or 0 or something, and then they do a semicolon. Then they
Right.
type their own command,
They
right?
would select data that,
Well, or select maybe, but they could do things like
delete.
delete or update everybody's name to Smith.
Yeah.
You know, they can do all sorts of damage there if you're not careful, depending on your security context, which hopefully isn't going to allow that. And so it's just not a good idea to concatenate in. But that's actually a good point. That's why these exist.
Oh, okay. I was confused by it. I hadn't seen it.
Yeah. So variables in SQL always have an @ sign. All right, so that's why there's an @ in front of it. This is considered a parameter, and the thing is, before we send it to the server, the parameter has to have a value. So I'll show you how to do that. I think, so I was just recently playing with Python trying to talk to MySQL, and it has something like this too. It has a parameterization. So if you do concatenate in, never concatenate in the text value, the text field, but you could validate the text field first and concatenate it in if you want. So I'm going to do the command object. Remember, just like above. So I'm going to do CMD, and actually I'm naming this on purpose this way, equals new SQL command. And it's going to take our SQL and it's going to take connected. Now, the other thing I have to do with this is I have to, not that, just CMD. I have to add that parameter. So I'm going to do parameters dot add with value. And I'm going to say that @key, and then I'm going to do a parentheses and say grant type key. So what it's doing here is it's saying that in this command object, I'm going to store a parameter. And I'm going to add that parameter with the value already assigned to it. And the value that I'm going to assign to it is the one that's passed into the method. Does that make sense? We're passing in an integer. And we're going to assign that integer to this key. This integer is going to come from the drop-down list. Remember how we had text and values? The value is an integer, right? It's the key. So we're going to get the key from the drop-down list, pass it to this method, and then do that.
Why does the drop-down list also show the key number?
Because so there's a display member and a value member.
Oh, okay.
The value member is hidden.
Okay.
And the drop-down list as a list can only display one text at a time. Yeah.
What does this do to prevent the same issue?
So there's a couple of things that are built into the command object. It does some testing of the parameter that it comes in. For instance, if there's and this can be a pain if you're trying to do certain things. It will forbid dashes, like a double dash. It'll forbid this. It'll forbid a %. I mean, it forbids a lot of characters, which is a pain if you actually need to enter those characters.
Yeah. Is there a function for like auto escaping those characters? Like you do?
There might be, there probably is, or you could not. You could, instead of using the parameter, you could concatenate it in and do your own validation first, right? But I mean, a couple of things too is that because it's an integer, you're not going to be able to do anything with it, right? If it's not an integer, it'll fail. And so you're not going to be able to do any. Where it gets bad is if you're concatenating in the actual text box. which I see
Yeah.
done in PHP all the time. And it's a really bad idea. Yeah.
Why doesn't the where grant type key match where it's an ampersand key on the grant type key? Do those have to be identical?
Where, what do you mean?
On the command line. Command line, okay?
This is, so this is that key, right?
Yeah.
That's grant type key, those match.
Oh, okay, so that goes with your.
Yeah,
No, I see,
Okay.
I think I see what you're asking. The one with the info marks where it's
Right,
selected.
yes, right, yeah, where you're, yeah.
That's from within the SQL.
Okay, that's the query. Okay.
yeah, that's the query.
Okay, as opposed to the name.
Oh, I see, you were wondering, yeah. A couple of things about SQL, even in this context, it's not case sensitive.
Really?
Yeah, SQL is never case sensitive.
Even for table?
It's not.
It's not, but people are very high and mighty about having it look a particular way.
So typically, I mean, if I were to do this in the usual,
For sure that, like those keywords, but what about the table name? Like the
now that depends actually. You can make a,
alias?
no, I mean, you can make a database case sensitive, but it is not by default. Even MySQL and
Really? Huh.
Postgres are not by default, but you can make them case sensitive. And SQL, the language SQL, is never case sensitive. All right, but this is the convention, and I'm lazy, so I don't always do the convention. And it's for readability, right? The keywords are in caps. All right, the rest of the code. So we do need a table equals, we need a new data table. Got the table. We do need to make it new. And actually, the rest of the code could be exactly like this.
Is there a way to do this without copying this code? Because we have this.
Yes, and I'm going to show you that in 1 second, actually. So what I was going to say is, oh, I haven't declared the reader. So I should have copied that too.
So you're copying.
Well, I just didn't, I forgot to declare the reader down here. Now, the thing is, when you find yourself repeating a block of code like this, your instinct should be, yeah, make a separate method for it. You should never copy blocks of code if you can avoid it. It's just not, it's just bad form. So how would we make a method for this?
Well, we're working with our custom class, so we could just make these properties of our class, maybe.
Well, you could, but well, I think, well, I'm just going to make a quick method because I think that's, this is called refactoring, actually, refactoring. So I'm going to make this one private. It's going to return a data table also.
Can you move it up? Because I can't see what you're doing.
Sure, I'm making a new method. It returns a data table, and I forget what I called it in the. What would be a good name for this? There's a name in the. Process connection, I don't know. But what did you have, read?
Each data. It's making some stuff, but ultimately it's just like.
All right, what I'm going to pass in is the command object, right? Because that's what's different in each case. So I'm just going to put this in here. I am going to copy everything that we just copied. I'm going to cut it, actually. Okay, so we're going to pass in, I think I need to data table. That has to be spelled right. Data.
Table.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so all we have to do is this is going to pass, we're going to pass in our command object. It has the SQL string, it has the connection, it has the parameters, right? So all of, once we have that, it's all the same code. So what I have to do up above, and then I'll walk through it again. So we've got the command parameters here. I'm going to put table equals read data, comma, CMD, and then just return table. It's still returning a table.
Is it read data to turn a table?
Yes, so that table is getting copied to this. Right, and then we can do the same up above where we have all this code, and then I'll walk through it. So I'm going to cut out all of this and this. And then I'm going to say TBL equals, and it doesn't have to be made new, but it should be okay. TBL equals get our read data. And I'll pass it the command object. And then that's it. So I can, instead of repeating the code here, I make a method and just call it. It's more efficient, and it's certainly more elegant. So let's walk through the top. So I changed get grants, and I changed both of these. So what I did is, now we got the data table. Actually, it doesn't need to be made new here. I can get rid of that line. Doesn't need to be made new because it's getting the table from the other method. So I've got my SQL string and I've got my command object. The command object has the SQL and the connection. I pass that down to read data. So it comes down to read data, okay, creates the reader, makes a brand new data table, does the connection, the command executes the reader, the table loads the reader is closed, the connection is closed, it returns the table, which gets copied to this table, and then we return.
This only works if both of the tables are named TBL, right?
Actually, no, you can name them locally differently if you wanted. What I do need to have the same as CMD probably.
Yeah, okay.
What's my SQL here? Select grant request.
Can I go back to the services tab?
Something is wrong.
The which one?
The first one. The last one.
I just wanted to show you,
So do I have to?
in general, although there are times when we're going to be doing things that are really close to the same, but with the little variations. In general, if you can generalize something into a single method rather than into several methods that are close to each other, it's better. Especially if they're identical, like what you're doing. Does what I did make sense, or does it confuse you more? What? Page up?
Or page down.
This way?
Yeah.
To the very last method? Yeah.
In terms of this, I guess aesthetics or just like convention, would it be all right to initialize our table as a call to read data? And then immediately return it as like a 2-line.
Oh, you mean declare it right here, right here?
Oh no, not in read data, but in the methods that
Oh.
reference it. To just say like right through a return statement.
Sure, you could.
Table TBL equals read data.
Yeah, you could do that. He was asking if you could declare the table right here, and yes, you could. I will post this. So other questions on this? This is taking a little longer than I meant to today. That's all right.
And get services, do we still need?
So get services, what I did, so there's only the 5 lines there. This one is actually unnecessary because you could declare data table here. But we got our SQL string and our command object. We called read data method, which returns a table, and then we also return that table. The private method down below is returning it to here, and then this will return it to the web page.
So for the first table, we're only seeing the grant type name, but the key is bound. The grant type key is bound.
Yes, it is.
In the data.
In the drop-down list, yeah.
And then for the second type, we're using this added value as our parameter
Yes.
to make our parameter here. So we're saying for this parameter grant type key of the first type, only show the values that have that relationship.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we can do this. Where this happens is going to be back in the web page.
Right. But right now that's not happening because we haven't.
Yeah, in fact, it would be really hard to even. So we could do a unit test if we wanted, and we could put a value in there and see if it returns anything. Later, I might show you a unit test. Are you guys? So I was trying to show you something, make it a little bit more sophisticated. But on the other hand, I know it's a little confusing to move things around after I had them.
No,
Yeah.
that's the lesson I need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so this is like moving. I mean, when you start refactoring, I always want to add an R to that. When you start refactoring, you are starting to move away from beginning coding into more intermediate and advanced coding because you're worried about elegance as well as does it work?
Yeah.
Because it would work perfectly fine if you just repeated it, right? And yet it's still not as good.
Well, I mean, so by repeating it, the main thing that I can see is if you have it set and done in one space, right? You don't have to worry about copying errors. You don't have to worry
That's true. I mean,
accidentally transposing something. You've got it done. It works. You've done it once, and then all you're doing is just, hey, see that. Hey,
And
see
you can
that.
test that thing. You can test that specific thing very
Yeah, exactly.
right, yeah, no, it's much better. There are lots of reasons why this is better.
Yeah.
But in terms of just brute force making it would work just fine the other way, right? But this is better for a lot of the reasons that you said. So, yeah. All right. But when you first start programming, it's usually just a victory to get it to work.
Yes.
It's not necessarily a matter of getting it to look pretty. I suppose for some people this would never look pretty.
Oh.
I mean, just because it's code, but All right, let's go back to the web page. Let's finish this thing up.
Yeah.
So in the web page, we go to the default ASPX. I'm going to go to design. So the design view, it's down at the bottom. You have your different, design split source.
Oh.
The reason I want to go to the design is I need to make a couple of changes. Not big changes. Up on the box here, the drop-down box list, there's a little smart tag there. I don't know why Microsoft uses these little smart tags, but there's a little smart tag. You could do this in the code too, but it actually works nicely here. I'm going to do enable auto postback. Does anybody have any idea what that means?
Auto postback?
Yeah. It means that when you select
It automatically submits.
right, it automatically submits. So when you make a selection, it's going to automatically submit it to the server. Now, that is not its default behavior because actually that could be really annoying.
Yeah.
If every time you made a selection in a form or something, it automatically went back to the server, that would be a pain. In our case, we're going to do it that way. The other way to do it would be to put a button on here, something that you have to have something that will post to the server. Right. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an event by double-clicking the drop-down list. And it creates an event called drop-down list selected index changed. So what this is that this is fired every time you change the focus in the drop-down list. So what I did to do that is in the design, in the ASP, I double-clicked on the drop-down. If you double-click a control, it gives you the default event. And as you might remember, just to be thorough here, if I go back into source, so notice there's a couple of things that have been added. Auto postback equals true, and then there's an on-selected index changed equals drop-down list one here.
The auto postback is there, but not the on-site.
Did you double-click the? Did you double-click the control?
So yeah, the auto. So we got enable auto post. Good.
Right, and then double-click.
This guy.
Yeah, double-click it. There you go.
So now this is true, but I don't see the others. I don't see the auto post. I don't see the others.
Let me go back. Yeah. So this design.
Oh, it should kick you.
Why is it doing that? It should go. Well, if that fails,
Let's do it by hand.
yeah, you can type it in by hand. So what you would have is on selected index change equals drop-down list one selected index changed. The advantage of doing this by hand, this part has to be exactly as is. It's the attribute. This you can name whatever you want.
So when I double click, I'm not getting anything.
Yeah, some people aren't. I don't know why. How many didn't get something? Yeah, I mean, it should take you to the code window. So if we go into design and then double click it. I know what you're doing. Make sure you're not running.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
That's definitely.
Where's it supposed to go?
It's supposed to go to the code window.
Why is it?
Where is it?
So you try to get the wrong.
Oh, no.
What does it say? One second. That actually looks okay. Yeah. Kill it and go to the source.
I make this.
Yeah. Yeah, there.
It's an ASP.
That should be okay.
It's not going.
Well, don't run it from there, I think. So if you type it there, you also have to type it in the code.
Someone else too.
Yes, actually go to design it and see what happens when you double click it. Yeah. No, it's still not doing that. So go to the C# code. So if you have to type it there, you need to also type it in the C#.
That makes sense. You know where in this? Creating an event?
It's just not going to the CS. It's just going to.
Right, so if it's not going to the CS, try just typing this in, which is a pain to type.
Okay.
And then go to the C# code, and I'll show you what to type on that side. Usually when you double click a control, it goes. We all have the same setup. I don't know why it would behave differently on different machines. So what you want is on selected index change. That part has to, and that actually should come up in the IntelliSense. And then equals, this you can actually don't have to name it the same, but this is the default name. But when you go to the C#, then you should have a method with that name, and it needs to have object sender and event args.
Are we supposed to be able to guess how to write this method? Because I see the pieces, but I don't know how to make sender like realize its identity is a grid of data.
Oh, well, we'll assign it. So actually, this part, the object sender will be the drop-down list.
Oh, it's this object. Okay. So it's going to be a parameter, or it's.
Well, yeah, but we don't have to provide it.
Right.
This happens behind the scenes. And I don't know that there will be an event arg. There might be. It's just that every method looks like this. If you're not writing this in web stuff, if you're doing it in writing Windows forms and stuff, you have to write your own event things for some things. And they become, they're done as delegates, which is a long story. All right, are we ready, sorta? So the thing is, you need this on both pages, whether you add it manually or get it by double clicking. And I do not know why some people's double click did not work.
Yeah.
You guys, everybody have it? So it looks like, some of you I know have worked on this, but I'll probably give you Tuesday to work on this, right? Because I'm taking up all your time. And I want to be able to circulate and help you as you hit errors and things. So I'm going to do another method, and then we can walk through it again. I'm just going to do a protected void. I'm going to, for lack of imagination, call it fill grid. And I'm doing this separate from the event because I said for code reuse, it's almost impossible to call the code from the event itself because of these two parameters. I mean, you can't call this event unless you provide arguments, you know, for sender and for event arg. And then it has to match the underlying delegate, which you can't see because it was generated on the server, or will be generated on the server. So it's just almost impossible to call it. So if you ever need to call the method again, it's better just to build it separately and then call it from the event. Right? It just makes it much neater down the line. So to fill the grid, all right, so a couple of things. We need to get the value from the drop-down list, right? Right, because we're going to pass that to the method. One of the things, I'm talking you through this, but if you had to do it on your own, first of all, it might be easier if you're doing it on your own if you had thought it through first. I mean, if it was your plan, you might know more of what's going on than when you're following my plan. The other thing is that it's always a good idea to write it out or draw a picture so that you have some idea how these pieces are talking to each other, what you have to do first, second, third. It's worth taking the time to actually think it through first. So then you can mess with the syntax without, you know, and it'll take a while, particularly if you're new to C#, to get the syntax. But if you're fighting with the syntax and the logic at the same time, it becomes just a morass. It becomes really hard to do. So I'm going to create an integer because that's what the key is. I'll actually just call it key. And I'm going to get it from the drop-down list one, dot, and I'm going to go to S because we really, actually, we do want the selected value, right? And I don't know if I can do this. Let's see if it's happy if I do that. It is not. All right, so I'm going to do int dot parse I have to convert it to a string to turn it into an int, which is a little bit weird, but it's happy with that. All right, so the value is in there and it's stored as a value, but it's stored as an object. It's not an int, it's not a string, it's whatever. For some reason, it won't let me cast the object directly to an int. I tried that and it stayed underlined, so that's how I know, not because of any grading. It won't let me cast it directly to an int. So what I'm doing is I'm going to parse it out as an int. But parse only works on strings. So you might be able to do convert without, there's also int.convert, or convert to int, I think. There's other methods to do this.
So what is the value of drop-down list one dot selected value?
It's whatever we've selected. So like food is the first one, right? So in the list, there's food is the word. Okay. And then the value will be 1. Rent might be 2, you know. So this is being stored. This is what's being displayed. So when you ask for the value, you're getting the number that goes with it.
It doesn't start at 0?
No. Data tables don't generally start at 0.
Because then those values are the grant type key.
These are actually from the database.
Oh, okay, so.
They actually don't have anything to do with the order of these things in the list.
Okay.
So if I had sorted them, for instance, these would not be in order. I mean,
But food would still be 1.
food would still be 1, but if I had something like I have education might be, I don't know, 6 or 7. So it'd be like 612 or things like that.
So this is an already determined value that we're pulling.
It is. This value is from the database.
So it does not have a predetermined data type. The reason I'm asking is we're taking this int.key and then we're parsing.
It actually, in the database, it does have a predetermined data type. But because the drop-down list is meant to store stuff, it doesn't have. In the drop-down list, and in a lot of Microsoft's objects, what they store is the data type object.
Oh, got it.
An object is the parent of all objects.
Okay.
So this could be an int, this could be a string, this could be a customer object.
So that's why we have to do this sort of.
Right, we always have to convert them to whatever they are.
Okay.
And the reason why they store it as objects is so that they can store literally anything, right? So object is, as I said, it's the granddaddy of everything.
Wait, can you get the int value by kind of investigating the object for its properties, and one of the properties is going to be an int?
Possibly, but I don't know if it actually does that. I don't know if it just, I think it just is object value. I mean, there's an int in it, right?
Right.
Or this one would work. I don't know if you could do that. You could try.
I don't know how this object, or like what the int is to the object.
It's actually going to be an integer. So here's something that you might not know, particularly if you come from a Java world. Primitive types are not primitive types in C#. Even primitive types are objects.
Oh, yeah.
So int is actually a child of object. And int actually has methods. Parse. All right, there's no such thing as a primitive type in C#. There are in Java. So in Java, what you have is superclasses that you can, so there is an integer class that has a parse that will take a string and turn it into an integer. But int is the primitive type, integer is the superclass that will do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think actually Microsoft handled it a little bit more elegantly, but they had Java to work from.
Yeah.
So this gives us the value. At this point, then we can just call. So we need a data table, right? I've been naming them all table. You don't have to do that. Equals DC, which is our class, and we're going to say get grants. And in the grant, we have to pass it a value, an integer value, and we'll pass it key. So we're getting this from the drop-down list. We're passing that value to the method in the class, which is going to return a table with the related grants. And then the rest is just to grid view one dot data source, spelled right, equals table. And this one, because it's a table, it'll display everything. You don't have to do those, text member, data member. I just have to do the data bind. Okay, that's all the code I have to do on this side, except I do have to call this from the event. There's actually one more thing we have to do, but I'll demonstrate why we have to do it first. Does that make sense? We're just getting the key from the drop-down, passing it to the method that we wrote in the class, and then binding it, right? So this is just, on the client side, and you'll find this all quarter, because there's two sides usually. There's a service side and a client side. The client side's a breeze compared to the service side, because you're doing the code elsewhere, right? On the web page, you should really be doing very little except figuring out how to display the code or how to get it, the values. So now this will probably sort of work. And again, it's going to be ugly. Now, the problem is, it may not work. Oh, there it did. But it went back to food. And it's always going to go back to food. All right. So there's a couple of little things we have to change. Boy, that is a really ugly table, especially zoomed. So let's fix it so it doesn't always go to food. I guess I can just close that, stop running. All right, so this actually has to go up here. Is there anything else I have to do? It seems like there was, there's a couple of things I might do. So the first thing I'm going to do is say if not equal post is postback. Not so not equal, just not is postback. Anybody have an idea of what postback is? It's actually it's not a generic web term, it's Microsoft term. So every time you make a change on a web page, it goes back to the server and redraws the whole web page, right? Unless you're using Ajax, every single time you make any change on the web page, it goes back to the server and redraws the page. Or at least whenever you press a button, or in this case, do a select. Every time you make a call to the server, the entire web page is redrawn. This is saying only do this the first time. What Microsoft calls a postback is every time except the initial load. So it's saying don't do this. Don't load the drop-down list except on the initial load. Now it preserves, so I'll show you. It preserves the state of these by writing them all to a hidden file that goes back to the server. So now if I choose childcare,
Hey.
These are all for childcare. It stays at childcare. If I go to home repair, it goes to home repair, and it has the amounts there. Okay, so it's preserving the state of what we chose, right? Nobody's ever done funerary. Utilities, okay. If I go to the source of the page, notice this huge hashed blob.
Hey.
That's the state of the controls being written back to the server. And when the page reloads, it returns the state and it repopulates the controls. Web pages do not have state, which means they can't preserve their values in the RAM of the local machine. So when you redraw the web page, if you don't have some
call back to the line in the new method that we created in the class. That says reader command execute reader is where you have the error line.
Right, so that means it's throwing an error in your SQL. Actually, so is it doing it when you select?
Yeah, so.
Let's look at what you incorrect syntax. Let's go back.
Data table equals.
Well, let's go back to the class. So it says it's an error.
Dude, I think you can just put data tables after that.
I think it's actually, it says it's an error from.
Yeah.
Oh, get rid of, you have two from.
Oh, okay, so but it's still in the star, right?
No.
No.
I replaced it with a few.
Okay,
What if I'm not gonna?
yeah.
Incorrect syntax.
So let's look at it. You know what the big problem is? So you broke your things, but you need to have spaces. If you don't have spaces, it just wraps it together.
What if I'm getting
So I'm thinking that your event isn't.
This needs to be from Oh, yeah. It makes a difference.
Let's look at your.
Because you have that error and then I get strong.
Yes, they did.
So let's look at your.
Yeah, there you go.
So you just have to know what the steps are. You got to start with your stuff. You're like, you got caught in gymnastics, right? Huh? Not really.
No.
No. I'm kind of self-conscious, actually. But I know it about myself, so I try to counter. What?
Yeah.
Sure, be honest about who you are with yourself.
Exactly.
Counteract your nature though. I say embrace it, whatever you want.
No, it's not a good thing to do. Not everything that's in your nature is something that you want to express. Right? You got two wolves standing here, right?
Which one you want to see?
Right.
Yeah. I don't really, yeah, I'm happy to hear it.
You're happy to hear it all.
No response.
Your feedback.
Yeah.
So can I do it again?
How about the errors?
So this is which one's that? Did you get that? The postcard? No, there's no error. But what I can't.
The same thing.
Like, what is that chosen one? I can't choose the other one. That's why you need the
You don't have to put this. All this. That.
Okay, so. Yeah. Is it just the one line?
Right. You want to read it and take it out of that one.
What?
You're not for that.
Yes.
So.
I've been watching Doctor Who since the 80s.
I you know, it's a very long, very rare scarf.
Yeah.
Tom Baker.
Yeah.
Which one was that? I want to show you one other thing, so that we'll add, and then I will do a couple of things on error trapping, and we'll call it a day.
It is Elvis, James Bond.
I think that's.
Jane or Joanne.
So if I choose food, what happens? Nothing. And why? Anybody know why? Because I haven't changed the index. Right, so that's a bit of a pain in terms of usability. So if they wanted to see food, you can see food if you go there and then go back. But I'm going to fix that a little bit. It's just a little touch.
The assignment is to do this with book review, right?
Right, and the sequel, I gave you the sequel because it's a little bit more complicated because there's a join. So, and as I said, I will give you time. So I'm going to do drop down list 1, and I think I want items.
So I'm gonna call this.
And I want to do it at 0. And choose a. So this is just to add at the very top of the list, at the 0 index, I'm going to add choose a service.
Nice. Nice.
So this is just a little nicety. After the data bind, after all the data has been bound to the list, I'm going to add a new column to the list. I'm adding items and I'm inserting it. I'm inserting it at the 0 index, which means it'll be right at the top. I'm going to, and I say choose a service. So now when you run it, you'll see that it says choose a service. So now if you choose food, it works. Yeah.
No, choose service. Wait.
Yeah, let me go back to the code.
No, right there.
Okay.
Food, go food. Okay. Choose it.
Okay.
And then go back to choose. Choose a service. Did you get an error there?
No.
No.
So if you do the same thing twice, it doesn't do it. Well, it's weird that it.
If I choose service, it breaks.
It does break.
it back to, there it is.
Oh, so we could fix that. Here's a couple of things. When you got an error, notice they give you this. And again, I want you to learn how to error troubleshoot.
Yeah.
One of the things, there's a error message up here. You can also do view detail. And if you click on view detail, it gives you more than you ever wanted to know. Especially if you open this up. The data, keys, values. I mean, the part of the problem is that this is null, right? There's no object there's no key that goes with this, with the first one. So it won't parse to int, right? Couple of things you could do.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, we could do an if. If I think just drop down list one selected value not equal null. Then do this. And then I'm going to put the closing curly brace. Hoping that it would reformat. But I think, let's see if that works. So we'll do childcare. Then we'll go back up there. It's still crashed. Oh, the value is choose a service. Notice how I can hover. You can hover over any value and get what value is being stored there. Because I didn't specify a value, the text is both the value and the text. So that's easy enough to fix. So if drop-down listed value not, actually let's change this to not dot equals choose a service. Now it shouldn't throw an error anymore.
To the service? Okay, yay.
Okay, so it's working. All right, so I just did this if statement. The reason, as I said, if you don't have a value, then it just copies the text as both the text and the value. All right, so I have all this. I will post it on the blog. I will give you Tuesday to work on this. I mean, unless I find over the weekend that you guys have all completed it, then we'll move on. Okay. So these databases, I might try this weekend to make a video as to how to install these databases on your own machine. Or if not a video, at least a document. I actually do better with the document.
Like CDPF error that
So review one.
If you want to drop that.
Let's see what we got there. We don't have,
You change it?
is that page one?
Put all this into.
We don't have, the code page.
But there's no,
So
there's no condition.
we would need.
You have enough set it, right?
Oh,
You have set it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
because the if statement has to have conditions. Yeah. And these are
Our
the.
code, let me look at mine.
Did you write yours yourself?
You know, I'm thinking I must have. I just.
So the language is C#, auto wire up you can leave out actually if you want. Code file equals default, ASPX, and then you need the inherits default.
Okay.
So your page behind isn't seeing that page.
That makes so much more sense.
So is this, how was this today? You made it through? You're okay?
No. There's that.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of reasons I think. So one of them, actually, I see it right now, yes, it's all. Feel great about that.
I don't. I'm not.
Just, it doesn't show. So the other possibility is, like if
Oh, wait, yeah, you compare with that.
I'm switching. Doing
Oh, you're next. Oh, is there? Oh, I was thinking that you're always just on. Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Mine still goes back to. Oh,
Yeah.
I always look because I make so many mistakes and
Oh.
So that's.
And then I can go back and just replace.
Oh, oh, okay.
I'm coming back. I'm going to
That's not here. So the average is 0.
Okay, so let's just look at my.
Yeah, it's on like 38 of the default with AFP yes.
Okay, so so the two things that we added in this line here and then this line, if actually go for
Have to worry about.
Everything saved us.
I get to sign it on there, right? And I right? I know, but then I know it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, I went
There are
through,
dates on it, but I'm not worried about the dates. It's mostly that I get it done and they understand.
I went through all their videos.
So, the dates are, I make up anything recorded and yesterday, so.
Yeah, okay, because I saw that,
Yeah, we're already
seems
behind.
like we're two assignments behind.
We are, don't worry about that. The reason
We're
why,
like,
it took us a while to get set up to get configured, longer than I thought it would. So we're behind even where I would, but yeah, don't worry about the dates. I'll be right back.
Honestly, I don't even know how to do it. Like, I don't know where. They have changed something in.
So, this is information for or you could get full version.
That's how. Meeting people.
But I would also do 2015, not 2016, because 2016 is still in beta.
server, so we install.
So all you need is Express.
Okay.
But if you want the full versions, you can get them through DreamSpark.
Yeah.
Do they only last a year?
No, they last forever. That being said, that they're not licensed for use, it is for learning. But no, they don't die. That's the nice thing about the DreamSpark. Now, if you go to Microsoft, you can download them and they will last for 6 months to a year
Okay.
as a trial. But DreamSpark, they'll last. They don't die.
Yeah. I'll put it on my laptop.
Okay. Now, my problem is, I think this is kind
Well, that's because, so.
Yeah.
Put it down in front of the drop.
Or it's not being called.
I think.
Wow. So this is even called. Because if it was, then it would stop.
Let me try to post this online
Yeah.
and then. So as I said, there is a version on GitHub. I'll put this version on the blog. Oh, and you need to stop the video. So it looked like